In the early 1990s, a seemingly ordinary couple lived a quiet suburban life in Chicago. They blended in seamlessly, living what seemed like a normal, quiet life. But beneath that facade, they were hiding a deadly secret. They were masterminds behind a spree of car thefts and bank robberies across the Chicago area that left a trail of chaos and even death in their wake. Here is the infamous story of the bearded bandit. It all started on January 9th, 1990, when the man robbed his first bank, the first nationwide bank in Wilmette, using a unique, almost military-like method with precision. Disguised with a fake dark beard, baseball cap, sunglasses, and driving gloves, he audaciously entered the bank, police scanner in hand, and announced a holdup. This became his signature style, repeated over the next 2 years during a string of robberies. Bank employees soon gave him a name, the Bearded Bandit. Interestingly, his wife was always in the background, playing a crucial role in their heists by arranging getaway cars. Together, they seemed unstoppable until one fateful day in December 1991. But how did it all begin exactly? Jeffrey Erickson had what you might call a typical middle-class upbringing in the suburbs of Chicago during the 1960s and 70s. His family wasn't wealthy, but they were comfortable, and life in the Erickson household was stable. His father worked as a manager at a telephone company while his mother took care of things at home, looking after Jeff and his older brother Jim. Growing up, Jeff was a social kid. He wasn't a standout student by any means, but people knew him for his remarkable memory. He had this almost photographic recall, especially when it came to things he was interested in. Whether it was random trivia or facts from a particular subject, Jeff could rattle off details with ease. In high school, Jeff was part of the swim team at Niles West High. Swimming wasn't a big passion of his, but it kept him active and gave him a group to be part of. He was average in most things, never excelling in academics or sports, but never failing either. He got by, content with blending into the crowd most of the time. After graduating from high school in 1977, Jeff made a decision that would shape his future in ways he couldn't have predicted. He joined the Marine Corps. It wasn't an unusual path for young men at the time. Military service was seen as a way to build character, gain some discipline, and maybe figure out what you wanted to do with your life. For Jeff, it seemed like the right move. His time in the Marines was where he really began to shine in one particular area of marksmanship. He quickly proved himself to be an excellent shot, and his skill with a rifle earned him recognition. This precision with firearms would stick with him for the rest of his life. After serving 4 years, Jeff was honorably discharged at 22 years old. He was now a civilian again, with the discipline and training the Marine Corps had instilled in him. But life after the Marines wasn't going to be as straightforward as he might have thought. Jeff returned to civilian life in the Chicago area, trying to figure out what was next. He had the skills, the experience, and the training from the military, but like many veterans, he found the transition to normal life a bit disorienting. The structure and order of the military were gone, replaced with the uncertainty of what his next steps would be. It wouldn't be long before he met someone with whom he would get into a dark, dangerous path that no one could have foreseen. In 1981, 23-year-old Jeff walked into a bar in Niles, Illinois, where fate brought him face to face with Jill Cohen, a tall blonde high school senior celebrating her 17th birthday. Despite the fact that Jill was still in high school and there was a 6-year age gap between them, it didn't seem to matter. They clicked instantly, bonding over their mutual love of animals, and from that moment on, they were inseparable. Jeff affectionately nicknamed her Gorgeous, and the pair fell hard for each other. Jill's home life, however, was far from perfect. Her parents were going through a bitter divorce, and the emotional toll weighed heavily on her. She struggled with depression, and her family's constant turmoil only made things worse. Being with Jeff felt like an escape, a lifeline she could cling to amid the chaos. Just 6 months into their relationship, Jill decided to drop out of high school and move in with him, leaving behind her troubled home life in search of something more stable with Jeff. Their connection was intense, and in July of 1983, the couple decided to make it official by getting married in a simple civil ceremony. For the first few years of their marriage, life seemed relatively normal. Jeff found work as a truck driver, while Jill pursued her passion for science, studying chemistry at Loyola University. She also worked as a lab technician, contributing to the household while continuing her education. The couple's shared love for animals only grew, and before long, their home was filled with dogs and birds. It wasn't always easy, though. Their landlords weren't too thrilled about the growing menagerie, and as a result, Jeff and Jill found themselves moving frequently to avoid eviction or having to part with their beloved pets. In 1986, Jeff decided to make a major career change. He joined the Chicago Police Academy and soon after landed a job with the Hoffman Estates Police Department in the suburbs. It seemed like a solid plan. At first, Jeff had the discipline from his time in the Marines, and his sharp shooting skills were unmatched. On the surface, he had the makings of a great police officer. But things didn't go as smoothly as he had hoped. While Jeff was great with people and had a natural way of putting the public at ease, he wasn't exactly cut out for the job. His boss, Police Chief Donald Cundiff, later remarked that Jeff just didn't have the common sense needed for basic police work. His performance was less than stellar. and it became clear that law enforcement wasn't his calling. Jeff himself admitted that he wasn't tough enough for the job. He hated making arrests and found it hard to be strict with people. In his mind, he wasn't just enforcing the law, he felt like he was ruining someone's day, and that didn't sit right with him. Eventually, the department let him go, and just like that, his brief career in law enforcement came to an end. But soon, Jeff's life took a drastic turn. He began using his insider knowledge of law enforcement not to uphold the law, but to break it. And as you may have guessed, of course, he brought Jill along with him for the wild ride. It all started on January 9th, 1990, when Jeff walked into the First Nationwide Bank in Wilmette, Illinois, completely unrecognizable in a fake beard, baseball cap, and sunglasses. He carried a police scanner and a gun, ready to put his plan into action. Calmly, he told the bank tellers that it was a robbery without much fuss. Jeff walked out with thousands of dollars in cash. This wasn't a one-time deal. It marked the beginning of a dangerous crime spree that lasted 22 months. During this time, Jeff hit 8 banks in the Chicago area, making off with close to $200,000 adjusted for inflation. That's more than $430,000 today. Locally, Jeff earned the nickname the Bearded Bandit, known for his robberies that were carried out with military-like precision and careful planning. But Jeff wasn't operating alone. His wife Jill was right there with him, working behind the scenes. She played a crucial role in helping Jeff plan each heist, always making sure a getaway car was ready and waiting when they needed it. By February 1991, it looked like Jeff and Jill were living the high life. They purchased a 2-story townhouse on Waterford Drive in Hanover Park for $86,000, putting down a cash payment of $22,600. When asked, Jeff told the real estate agent that he was running his own business and that money wasn't an issue. On the outside, they appeared like any other couple settling into a comfortable suburban life. But behind the scenes, their new home and lifestyle were funded by the string of bank robberies they had meticulously pulled off. The couple, known for keeping to themselves, lived a quiet and somewhat mysterious lifestyle. They were night owls, often heading out at 3 a.m. on their noisy Honda motorcycles, catching the attention of their neighbors. In May, Jeff decided to pursue a longtime passion and opened a used bookstore in Roselle called Best Used Books. Jeff had always loved reading and enjoyed interacting with people, making the bookstore a perfect fit for him. It quickly became a success, with customers impressed by Jeff's deep knowledge of classic literature. Though they still kept a low profile, this new venture gave Jeff and Jill the appearance of a more settled, ordinary life while continuing to hide their darker secrets. But beneath the surface, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Jill was battling serious depression, and over time she started using alcohol to cope. When she drank, the usually calm and composed Jill would become angry and even violent. It wasn't just the drinking though. When she was sober, her mood swings were also unpredictable, leaving Jeff feeling frustrated and confused. Out of concern for her well-being, Jeff decided to take Jill to a local hospital. There, doctors diagnosed her with schizophrenia and manic depression, which is now known as bipolar disorder. Jill began receiving treatment and was given new medication along with therapies designed to help her manage her condition. While it wasn't an easy road, it was a step toward understanding and addressing her mental health struggles. On top of Jill's mental health struggles, the couple was also facing serious financial problems. Jill had a habit of maxing out their credit cards, and Jeff was sinking a lot of money into his bookstore. As their debt piled up, the pressure to keep robbing banks became greater, and so did their confidence in their criminal activities. By this point, Jeff had become skilled at his heists. Known only as the Bearded Bandit, his identity was still a mystery. With the help of a police scanner, Jeff always managed to pull off the robberies quickly, getting in and out before the authorities had any chance of catching him. On November 4th, 1991, Palatine police officer Kevin Marr noticed a Honda driving with an expired license plate and decided to pull the car over. What seemed like a routine traffic stop quickly turned into a dangerous situation. As soon as Maher initiated the stop, the driver slammed on the brakes, jumped out of the car, and opened fire. He fired 3 shots from a rifle directly into Maher's squad car, one of them hitting the officer in the shoulder. Despite his injury, Maher acted fast. He threw his police cruiser into reverse to get out of the line of fire and immediately radioed for backup. The shooter, who was reportedly wearing what looked like a fake beard and sunglasses, didn't rush or panic. According to witnesses, he calmly got back into his car and drove away, leaving the scene before anyone could get a clear look at his real identity. The shooter's cool demeanor and disguise added to the mystery of who he was. A massive manhunt quickly followed the shooting, with police helicopters hovering over the city for hours, scouring the area for any sign of the suspect. Local schools were placed on lockdown to ensure students' safety, and officers went door to door in nearby neighborhoods, hoping to catch a glimpse of the bearded fugitive. Despite their efforts, the man seemed to have vanished without a trace. Investigators soon discovered that he had abandoned the stolen Honda shortly after the shooting. It appeared that he had meticulously planned his escape, switching to another vehicle that had been strategically placed nearby, ready for him to make a quick getaway. The police were left scrambling as their suspect slipped through their fingers. Oh, Since the shooter's description closely matched that of the elusive bank robber the authorities had been chasing, the FBI was brought in to help. A special task force was also quickly formed, consisting of federal agents and detectives from 7 different local police departments. Their mission to catch the bearded bandit. The task force began by reviewing every bank robbery in the Chicago area from the past few years, searching for any patterns or clues they might have missed. One detail stood out: the bearded bandit had a clear preference for Japanese-made vehicles, and all of them had been stolen. This gave investigators a crucial lead to follow as they tried to connect the dots and figure out who this mysterious criminal was. With federal agents now on the case, the hunt for the bearded bandit intensified. The bearded bandit had his routine down to a science. After each bank heist, he would make his getaway in one vehicle, only to switch to another a few blocks away, leaving law enforcement scrambling to keep up. He took extra precautions to avoid detection, wearing layers of clothing to disguise his build and always keeping gloves on to ensure no fingerprints were left behind. Detectives also began to suspect that their target might have a law enforcement background. Security footage from the banks showed that the robber was incredibly comfortable handling the gun. He held his weapon in a very specific way, one commonly taught in police or military training. It was another clue that suggested this wasn't just any ordinary criminal. His use of a police scanner to monitor authorities' movements further supported the theory. On top of that, he was careful to rob banks across different jurisdictions, making it harder for local police departments to connect the dots or catch him in the act. This clever strategy gave him an advantage, as it made the investigation more complex and time-consuming for law enforcement. Despite all the clues pointing to someone with an insider's knowledge of how police work, the bearded bandit continued to slip through their fingers. A few weeks after Officer Maher was shot, the bearded bandit struck again, this time targeting the First Chicago Bank in Elk Grove Village. As always, he was well disguised, wearing a fake beard and sunglasses, with a police scanner in one hand and a gun in the other. But this time he wasn't alone. The bearded bandit had brought along an accomplice. Witnesses described the second person as around 5'5" with a slim build, also wearing a fake beard and sunglasses. While the bearded bandit grabbed the cash from the tellers, the accomplice stood by the door, keeping watch. The robbery was quick and efficient, just like the others. The 2 criminals made their getaway in a stolen car, which was later found abandoned only a few blocks away. Though the authorities were growing increasingly frustrated by their inability to catch the robbers, they knew they were getting closer. They just needed one lucky break to finally close in on their suspects. On December 10th, 1991, federal agents noticed a stolen Mazda parked at the edge of a lot. Its ignition wires exposed an obvious sign that it was ready to be hot-wired. Sensing a potential lead, the agents decided to keep watch for 6 days. They staked out the car, waiting for someone to return. Finally, on December 16th, their patience paid off. A rusty gray van pulled into the lot, and a man stepped out. He walked over to the Mazda and began to hot-wire the engine. Just as the agents had anticipated, law enforcement officers surrounded the man and took him into custody. The man was none other than Jeff Erickson, the elusive bearded bandit. When officers searched him, they found 2 loaded guns, a fake beard, and 2 fake mustaches, tools of the trade for the serial bank robber they had been hunting for months. Jeff's arrest was a major breakthrough in the case. As he was being arrested, his wife Jill, who was driving the gray van, sped off in a desperate attempt to escape. With police in pursuit, she led them on a wild high-speed chase through town, the van hurtling down the streets at speeds of up to 110 mph. It was like a scene from a movie as Jill weaved through traffic to outrun the officers. Eventually, she turned into a quiet residential neighborhood, but her luck ran out when she found herself at a dead-end street. Realizing she was cornered, Jill pulled out a gun and fired at the police. In response, the officers shot back, aiming for the van's tires. The sound of gunfire echoed through the neighborhood as the van was immobilized, its tires shot out. Despite the chaos and the gunfire, the police managed to take control of the situation. Unfortunately, during the intense shootout, Jill was also hit by gunfire. But even after being wounded, she refused to give up. Instead of surrendering, she kept driving through the neighborhood, her van swerving wildly as she tried to escape. Her desperate attempt came to a sudden stop when she crashed into a low cement wall. The police, fearing she might still be armed, fired several more rounds at the van to ensure the situation was under control. Then there was only silence. Cautiously, the officers approached the vehicle, bracing for what they might find. When they reached the van, they discovered Jill unconscious, slumped over and bleeding from her injuries. Paramedics were quickly called to the scene and rushed her to the hospital while officers secured the area and collected evidence. While the dramatic shootout unfolded, Jeff was handcuffed in the back of a police car, listening to everything happening over the police radio. He couldn't believe his ears when he heard that shots had been fired. His heart raced as he worried about Jill, but he wouldn't learn her fate until later that evening. After being taken to the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Chicago, officers delivered the heartbreaking news that his wife was dead. Jeff was devastated. Just a few days later, he was escorted to the funeral home to see her body, still in handcuffs and surrounded by federal agents. It was a surreal and heartbreaking experience for him as he processed the reality of losing Jill. An autopsy conducted later revealed that the shot that took Jill Erickson's life had come from her own gun. When authorities searched the Ericksons' townhouse, they found an alarming stash of weapons and supplies. There were firearms, ammunition, knives, smoke grenades, gas masks, and a whole bunch of disguises. It was clear that Jeff and Jill had been preparing for something serious. In the garage, they discovered a 6-foot safe, which likely held stolen money or other valuables. Even more startling was a bulletproof vest that had just arrived in the mail that day, but hadn't been opened yet. Among all these discoveries, the most intriguing find was a tape in the VCR. It was the classic 1967 movie Bonnie and Clyde, a film about two notorious criminals who were deeply in love. On February 12, 1992, Jeffrey Erickson faced serious legal trouble when he was indicted on federal charges for bank robbery and state charges for shooting a police officer. He pleaded not guilty to all the charges, and his trial was set to start 5 months later. While Jeff sat in jail, he opened up to reporters about his feelings, expressing how much he missed his wife. "Jill and I were both loners, I guess. We were inseparable," he said. Despite the tough situation, he added, "What's keeping me okay in here is that I don't have to worry about her now." His words reflected the deep bond they shared, even in the darkest of times. Then, Jeff's trial kicked off in July of 1992, and it was a tense affair. One crucial moment came when Officer Ma, the police officer who had been shot, couldn't definitively identify Jeff as the person who had fired the shots. However, the prosecution had some strong evidence on their side. Federal agents testified that the shell casings found at the scene of Officer Maher's shooting matched a gun discovered in the Ericksons' home. Some bank tellers also found it difficult to identify the bearded bandit during the trial. In a surprising moment, when an employee from Savings of America Bank was asked to point out the robber in the courtroom, they mistakenly indicated a reporter from the Chicago Tribune instead of Jeff Erickson. Ultimately, Jeff was officially charged with 8 bank robberies, but authorities believed he might have been involved in 11. However, Jeff himself confessed to his lawyer that the number was likely closer to 20, just a few. Days into the trial, something seemed to be off with Jeff. His mother, worried about her son, noticed he was acting strangely. Concerned for his safety, she pulled Jeff's lawyer aside and shared her suspicions that he might try to escape. The lawyer took her seriously and passed the information along to the US Marshals, but unfortunately, they didn't seem to take it to heart. On July 20th, 1992, while being taken from the Dirksen Federal Building to the Metropolitan Correctional Center, Jeff made his move. He somehow managed to slip out of his handcuffs, catching everyone by surprise. In a shocking turn of events, he disarmed a deputy marshal, grabbing her service revolver in the process. Then, in a tragic moment, he fatally shot her partner, Deputy Marshal Bill Frakes. With chaos erupting around him, Jeff quickly turned and dashed up a ramp that led from the building's basement to the street, making a desperate bid for freedom. When the gunfire erupted, Harry Bamini, a retired detective who was working security in the Dirksen building, immediately rushed to the scene. Jeff, trying to escape and thinking on his feet, attempted to convince Bamini that he was an FBI agent. He believed that the suit he had worn for his trial would help him pull off this disguise. However, Harry wasn't fooled. As a seasoned cop, he recognized the situation for what it was and fired 6 rounds at Jeffrey Erickson with his .38 Special Service revolver, hitting him in the back. Injured, Jeff fell to one knee and muttered, "I'm going to jail, I'm going to die anyway, I'm going to take everyone with me." In a tragic and desperate act, he turned his gun on Harry, fatally shooting him before turning the weapon on himself. When the chaos settled, authorities discovered a small handcuff key next to Jeff's body, raising questions about how he had managed to escape in the first place. In the end, Jeff and Jill Erickson got the kind of ending they might have dreamed of. Much like their criminal heroes, Bonnie and Clyde, their story captured people's imaginations and movies were made about their lives of crime. Their names became part of the history of notorious criminals forever linked to their wild escapades. However, it's essential to remember that their love story ended in tragedy not just for them, but also for others. The families of Bill Frakes and Harry Bamini, who lost their lives while doing their duty, experienced unimaginable grief. These brave officers sacrificed everything to protect their community, and they will always be remembered for their courage and dedication. While Jeff and Jill's story may live on in films and books, the true cost of their actions reminds us that crime has real consequences. And that's the story of the bearded bandit and his wife, known for committing a series of violent bank robberies. If you enjoyed this video, share and subscribe for more interesting videos.